AFDB to close Africa's $170 billion infrastructure deficit. 75 billion naira MSME's palliative fund disbursement begins in all domestic airports to resume operations, plus OPEC clocks 60 in the business of stabilizing oil markets globally. This is Business Express and it is reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Leah Katung Babatunde. The African Development Bank, AFDB, is taking critical steps to ensure the possibilities of closing the over $170 billion infrastructure deficit on the continent. The bank said with an estimated financing gap of between $68 billion and $108 billion a year, proactive steps are required to address the gap. The Development Bank is primarily looking at strengthening public-private partnerships to channel more money into investments in infrastructure development in Africa. The AFDB recently hosted discussions on how the bank can strengthen support of public-private partnerships and channel greater investments towards economic and social infrastructure. The digital workshop tagged Designing the African Development Bank's PPP framework is coming on the heels of an ongoing global pandemic which has caused economic slowdown that have sharpened the already urgent need for investment into the African continent. Now, Nigeria has begun the disbursement of the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises 75 billion naira survival fund and guaranteed offtake stimulus schemes as contained in the Nigerian Economic and Sustainability Plan (NESP). The Minister of State, Industry, Trade and Investment, Mariam Katagum, who stated this in Abuja, said in keeping to its promise to support business overcome challenges posed by COVID-19. The government is set to commence implementation of two MSMEs initiatives, namely the MSME Survival Fund and the Payroll Support Scheme, as the first to be rolled out with 60 billion naira, and then the Guaranteed Takeoff Scheme 15 billion naira. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, on Monday introduced the Solar Connection Intervention Facility to complement the federal government's effort of providing affordable electricity to rural dwellers through manufacturers and assemblers of solar components and off-grid energy retailers in the country. The guideline, which is subdivided into two sections, includes upstream, participants and downstream participants. The CBN says the pathway to energy access, financial inclusion, and poverty reduction are closely linked and require rapid scale of pay-as-you-go off-grid technologies that will create a 7.5 trillion naira annual market opportunity. Okay. All right, and now I understand we have Dr. Omar Farouk Ibrahim. He is the Secretary General, Africa Petroleum Producers Association, APO. OPEC is 60, but of course, Dr. Farouk is at the helm of stabilizing the oil market in Africa. You're welcome to Good Business Express.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Doctor, the world has seen a devastating, of course, effects of COVID-19, which has more than half the price of crude oil in the world in recent time. How did Apple feel this trend when it started?
Well, Apple member countries, more than most countries of the world, have felt the brunt of COVID in the sense that our countries are heavily dependent on oil revenue. And of course, as you know, with COVID, demand for oil collapsed completely. And when the demand for your major revenue source collapses, then you are in deep trouble. For most of our countries, we went from having 100% demand to less than 20, and that reflected in the revenues of our member countries. We are yet to recover from that, but thank God, in the last month or so, things have improved, and we hope to see more improvement.
Okay, now still looking at the improvement, demand has weakened globally, and of course, most of the countries who export oil in Africa are basic dependence on oil revenue. How is this? How is the feel for you out there?
Well, we're still expecting that things will keep improving, but I think for us in Africa, we need to seriously sit back and reflect on what we are doing in the oil industry. We are heavily dependent on the external world for selling our crude. And for as long as we continue this way, for so long will we be at the mercy of the global economy. We expect, and this is what really Apple is working on now, that we are working on ensuring that we have on the African continent the infrastructure that will allow us to process up to 75% of the crude oil that we mine on our lands. We produce it, we do petrochemicals, we do everything that we need to do. Instead of sending 75 to 80% of our crude to Europe, Asia, and America, we want to reverse that. Have 75 to 80% processed in Africa, and then 25% or so can go out to the external world. Until we do that, we are really not going to get out of the mess that we found ourselves in. And really, this is what the new Apple is working on. We want to have continent-wide infrastructure, pipelines that go across member countries, refineries that take care of not just 1, 2, 3 countries, but regions.
Okay, so you've been around the energy industry for quite a while, and OPEC is 60, of course. How would you assess the performance of that organization in the last 60 years?
I believe that seriously, the world has been lucky to have had OPEC in the last 60 years. Without OPEC, I doubt very much if the progress that has been made technologically, economically, financially in the world in the last century would have been made. Because all the successes that you attribute to the 20th century in the world, in terms of economic growth, industrialization, transportation, pharmacy, agriculture, are attributable to oil.
Okay, what will be your take on OPEC's market share against the non-OPEC members in the global market?
Well, before COVID, the world supply was about 97 million barrels a day. And OPEC had about 43% of that 97 million barrels. Of course, with COVID, the supply has gone down by about 10 million plus. And as a result, OPEC's share has also gone down. Not, in fact, this is disproportionate because I think it's now under 40%, about 38, 39% of global crude oil supplies and condensates really come from OPEC. So the COVID has affected OPEC a lot more in terms of their production, in terms of the revenue that OPEC member countries that will get. Yes.
So now, while OPEC and, of course, allies are looking towards keeping the court to avert the glut that has, of course, been occasioned by weaker demands in the market, we're having countries like Nigeria and Venezuela who actually have the bulk of their revenues coming from crude oil. Now, with the new normal, how do you see countries wading off and keeping in track? For, of course, Nigeria is already looking at a recession.
Two important things. I think the challenge that oil producers are having is not really limited to Nigeria and Venezuela. Even Saudi Arabia, the largest oil exporting country, has serious challenges with crude oil revenue that goes to its budget. They are unable to balance their budgets as a result of the downward spiral in revenue that they are getting from their crude oil. It's just across the whole industry. All countries that are producing and relying on oil for their governmental revenue are in trouble. The way out, seriously, is particularly for us in Africa, is to seriously begin to look at a long-term strategy of getting out of this mentality that we produce crude to export to Europe or Asia or America and then get foreign exchange to come and do what we need to do in our countries. We need to be able to process the crude that we produce. Like I said earlier, 80% of what we produce should be processed on our continent, in our countries. If you are able to do that, believe me, we would have had some challenges with COVID, but definitely not in the proportion that it has come to affect us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. It's been nice having you speak with us this morning. Thank you for joining us on Business Express.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on now. Oil prices inch lower on Tuesday as a bleaker outlook for global fuel demand prompted fresh selling, but short covering ahead of a meeting later this week of OPEC and its allies known as OPEC Plus limited losses. Brent crude was down 3 cents at $39.58 a barrel, reversing earlier gains. The COVID-19 forced down oil production and reduced price of oil, leaving Nigeria, like other countries, with significantly medium-term fiscal challenges, especially with respect to revenues. Acting chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, Victor Morocco, says there is a need for government revenue of the country to be boosted up post-COVID-19.
A very critical stage, and we need all hands to be on deck for economic survival. All ideas will have to come up. We have to think outside the box to get solutions, and even at that, we must walk the talk. Not just theory. In revenue generation, when you talk about it, which is the critical challenge our country is going through, the Fiscal Responsibility Act requires the remittance of operating surplus to the CRF. What is the level of compliance with government-owned enterprises? We have already released reports showing that a lot of agencies, these government enterprises, are in default. So we expect better revenue monitoring exercises, better capital project verification exercises, better support to the president's economic team.
The federal government just this Monday said all airports in Nigeria are now open for domestic flights, noting that private charter operations will no longer need approval to operate domestically in all government-approved airports and all government-owned airports. However, the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, who disclosed this during the Presidential Task Force briefing, noted that the safety status of approved private airports should be checked with the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority (NTA). The such airports include Jalingo, Oyo, Asaba, Gombe, Nasarawa, Damaturu, among others. Sirika also stressed that all flights out of the country that are private chartered will still need approval, including their technical staff. And of course, we take a trip to the commodity markets. Dipped against riskier currencies on Tuesday as hope for a COVID-19 vaccine and big corporate deals improved investors' appetite for assets such as the yuan and euro. Nigeria's currency on Monday dropped in value by 7 naira as the dollar was trading at 460 from 453 and 452 naira 67 kobo traded at the weekend and Friday on the black market. This is in spite of the dollar allocation to about 5,000 bureau de change operators in the country by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Nigeria's central bank sells $10,000 twice weekly to the retail financial bureaus from the proceeds from the International Monetary Transfer Operators (IMTOs). Investigations show the dollar was selling at 460 naira in Lagos, except at the airport, where it was selling as 461. Traders were buying at 455 from individual sellers. At the BDC segment of the foreign exchange market, naira weakened by 1 naira as the dollar was sold at 462 during intraday trading from 461 on Monday. Now, stocks in Asia Pacific were mostly higher in Tuesday trade as investors watched China's August economic data released earlier in the day. Muplang Dakok takes it from here.
Stocks in Asia are mostly higher in Tuesday trade as investors watch China's August economic data released this Tuesday. Mainland Chinese stocks edged higher, with the Shanghai Composite up 0.40%, while the Shenzhen component advanced 0.651%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 0.43%. However, Japan's Nikkei 225 lost 0.44%. U.S. stock futures ticked slightly higher early Tuesday morning after the market kicked off the week with a broad-based rally on Monday. Dow Jones Industrial Average futures rose 64 points. Futures tied to the Nasdaq 100 and the S&P 500 also traded in positive territory. The move in futures follows a bounce-back session for Wall Street on Monday. European stocks are expected to open lower as investors shift their focus to upcoming central bank meetings by the U.S. Federal Reserve, Bank of Japan, and Bank of England. With Global Market Update, Muplang Dakok.
Now, thank you for being part of Business Express this morning. We value your feedback, so keep the questions, comments, and suggestions coming. Also, remember to intermittently wash your hands on the running water as the world battles COVID-19. You can watch all previous episodes on YouTube. You can also communicate with us on Twitter. The handle is NTA News Now and the hashtag is BizX. Thank you for joining us, and see you again tomorrow at 3.